In our fourth and final video, we're going to look at the Shakespeare canon's finishing elements, those last 5 plays that we call the romances. Romance is a term that means something more like tragicomedy than anything like what we would mean when we're talking about the kind of romance novels that you buy that are stories of, nurses meeting the handsome guy that came to fix her dishwasher. These are rather plays that were actually included in the original generic category of comedy, but they often have a very tragic tone to them. They just barely pull out comedy at the end, and they often feel much more complicated and more incompletely resolved. And so critics have noted that because they came together a group at the end of his career, they ought to really be separated out and thought of as a whole different category. The first of these plays that we want to consider in depth is Pericles. Pericles was co-written with George Wilkins, and it's a complicated case because Shakespeare's company never seemed to have been involved in publishing the play. We know it only from one bad quarto printing, which is an obviously garbled and incomplete text. Nonetheless, it's a fascinating play about a man who is separated from his wife and child and spends the rest of his life searching around the Mediterranean, trying to find them, and only when he believes he has lost everything at the end of the play is he reunited with them. He has a vision towards the end of the play in which a goddess descends to give him instructions about how to find his wife, and you can see that picture here. This is one of our clues that this play was probably written for the Blackfriars Theater, because we need a Deus Ex Machina, the stage machine, to bring this goddess onto the stage in order to deliver this vision to Pericles. It's a rarely produced play because of the poor quality of the script, not the poor quality of the plot, which is fascinating, but of the actual remaining script. But if you get a chance to see it, it's absolutely worth your time, and interestingly, it often plays very well to audiences. Cymbeline is another one of these large, scrawling plays, but it's both fascinating and wonderful. It would probably be produced far more often, but it began to fall out of the repertoire in the 18th and 19th centuries because the leading character is really the ingenue, a young woman named Imogen. In this play, she is sort of the equivalent in her emotional range of Hamlet in his emotional range in that tragedy. She has to do so many things, from the far side of the scale to comedic, almost farcical acts, down to the moment where she thinks she has found her husband's beheaded corpse and has a horrifying recognition scene. It's a play that deserves much more attention than it has been getting, but it was very successfully revived in New York a couple of years ago by the Fiasco Theater Company, using only 6 actors. This is the cast, the complete cast of this play, playing in the neighborhood of 40 characters, jumping back and forth between characters, and sometimes playing more than one character at the same time in the same scene. A terrific script that we may be seeing more of because of Fiasco's influence. The Winter's Tale is the romance that we consider in greatest detail in our class. Again, one of these plays that has a large, sprawling plot spread over time, um, largely in two sections, and there's an 18-year gap in between the two sections. And it has almost miraculous resolution at the end of the play. A character that we think is dead is represented on stage by a statue, and at the last moments of the play, this statue comes back to life. We understand that actually the character was never really dead. She was hidden away. And it's not a magic trick, but an optical illusion. But it's one that audiences don't see coming. You can often tell when you're sitting in a theater watching a production of Winter's Tale who knows the script and who doesn't, because those people who know are so antsy for the moment when the statue will come to life, and those who don't know are often completely shocked by the moment, depending on how well the effect is achieved. But I've seen it several times in the theater when it was absolutely miraculous, a most beautiful play. The Tempest is a play that is often thought of as Shakespeare's last play. It's not quite accurate, but still it has a kind of valedictory quality about it. It has some of the same plot conditions of the previous romances, except that in this play, what we would think of as the entire first half of the play, like in Pericles or in The Winter's Tale, is actually told to us only in one scene of exposition. So we only get what we think of as the last half of this bifurcated tale on stage in The Tempest. Interestingly enough, The Tempest actually seems to obey the unity of time. That is, the amount of time it takes to perform is the actual amount of time that the plot consumes while it's being performed on stage. The Tempest is the story of a man, Prospero, who was the Duke of Milan. It actually scans Duke of Milan in the play. But he's overthrown by a younger brother and exiled off to a desert island, where he, through magic, conquers the island and arranges an elaborate reunion and revenge upon those who deposed him and sought his death. But in the end, through an act of forgiveness, he manages to bring a new generation into play to resolve the crisis that has preceded their lives. With his writing partner John Fletcher, writing partner from late in his life, Shakespeare wrote a play called The Two Noble Kinsmen. This play was probably the last play that Shakespeare wrote of which we have a full script. There's also a lost play named Cardenio that we'll consider in just a moment. But Two Noble Kinsmen is based on a story from Chaucer, a kind of a complicated plot about two related men who are both in love with the same woman, and the complications of their pursuing her, and who wins her and who loses her, and under what circumstances. It has a very beautiful character called the jailer's daughter, who has a series of monologues, 4 monologues during the course of the play, that are terrific audition material for young character women. So, that's the 5 romances that finished Shakespeare's career. We want to think just a little bit about a couple other parts of the canon. 2 lost plays, Love's Labour's 1 and Cardenio, plays whose titles we know and think are independent plays, but we just no longer have copies of these plays of any sort, so we don't know quite what to make of this information we have about these two titles. We also, of course, have some poetry from Shakespeare. Venus and Adonis, The Rape of Lucretia, two very long narrative poems. We have the complete sonnets, an odd play called A Lover's Complaint, seems to be kind of a joke, and some miscellaneous poems as well. None of these poems are meant to be performed on stage, and in fact are, generally speaking, not performable. They were written for publication, but they're a different form of output than is Shakespeare's dramatic output. We also have a group of plays known as the Apocrypha, plays that at one time or another somebody said Shakespeare wrote, but most of those assignments to Shakespeare are either known to be false or at least seem unlikely now. Shakespeare's name became a selling point, and people sometimes stuck it on books just to try to get them to sell better, even when he was not, in fact, the author. A number of these plays we still have. Among the most interesting of this group is The Second Maid's Tragedy, probably by Middleton, but it might have some Shakespearean parts, and it might be the lost play Cardenio. It certainly treats the same subject matter as the Cardenio incident from Don Quixote. Arden of Feversham is probably by Thomas Kyd, but it has a scene that many people now think was written by Shakespeare. Edmund Ironside, author, is not known. Possibly a Shakespeare play. If so, it was written very, very early in his life before he mastered his craft. And Edward III, to which almost everyone agrees now Shakespeare was a minor contributor. We know that Shakespeare, or at least are pretty certain now, that Shakespeare collaborated on the Spanish tragedy, making a few additions to the play. Arden of Faversham could be and have some added scenes. Sir Thomas More, the play which we know he added a couple of scenes, and we think are one of those scenes we have in manuscript is actually in Shakespeare's handwriting, and then, as I just mentioned, Edward III, also an added scene. So that gives you a sense of the overview of the complete canon of Shakespeare. We're really concentrating today on the 5 plays that are in the group we call the romances, but are interested in this additional information about the few minor pieces left over in the canon of poetry and some parts of plays, just small additions here and there, where Shakespeare was probably play doctoring other people's output. And there we have it.